everybody. Welcome to the very last talk of the Psilocybin Summit, third annual Psilocybin Summit. Those of you who have hung in there, you've hung in there. I've seen a lot of the same names all weekend. It's really been great to make this journey with you. I really appreciate your presence, all of your amazing comments, all of your love and support throughout this weekend. We couldn't have done it without you. We do it specifically for you. And it means the world to us that you are here. I'm excited for our ultimate talk. Our penultimate talk was good. I think our ultimate talk is also going to be lovely, and really just the title itself, I resonate with. I like the idea of it for sure. And I will introduce our guest, who probably needs no introduction, but Chris Kilham is a medicine hunter, author, and educator. He has investigated medicinal and psychoactive plants in 45 countries and has appeared on over 2,000 radio and 500 TV programs globally. He's the author of 15 books, including the Ayahuasca Test Pilots Handbook, The Essential Guide to Ayahuasca Journaling, and is that 2 books or 1 book?
No, it's the Ayahuasca Test Pilots Handbook, and then the subtitle is The Essential Guide to Ayahuasca Journeying.
Got it. The New York Times called you part David Attenborough, part Indiana Jones.
And for that, I am eternally grateful. It was a very kind thing to say.
Yeah. It's great to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, Dan, this is a real pleasure. And I want to congratulate you on putting this whole thing together. I know it's an enormous labor to do these things and to get so many bright, talented, capable people with different ways of thinking about these matters. So congratulations to you and to everybody who hung in there. And thank you for those who are here tonight. Yeah.
Sure. And I don't want to take all the credit. I just do want to thank, because I see Maggie is here. And Maggie's been a big help. And, some of our fellow speakers are here, like Kane Barlow, and he's been a great supporter for a couple of years. So, it takes a village.
It does indeed.
And so you're going to be talking to us about keeping psilocybin wild.
I am. And what I thought I would do is go through some slides and try to do it with some speed so that we have some opportunity to answer questions afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and do this screen share thing here and hope that we're all in fine fettle with this. Let's see. Okay, we've got it. Is that right? We're in good shape here, Dan?
That looks great. I'm going to mute myself, turn off my camera, and let you go.
Okay, thanks so much. So good evening, everybody. I'm talking about keeping psilocybin wild, and I'll explain what I mean by that as we go along. But basically, I want to, give you a quick understanding of who I am and how I kind of fit into this scene. I'm a medicine hunter. I investigate botanical medicines all over the world. I've been doing this for 40 or so years. I work with indigenous native people. I help to establish sustainable trade in botanicals. And in the process of doing this, I've lived with and worked with and traveled with and celebrated with and sat in ceremony with and enjoyed the friendship of and the company of hundreds and hundreds of different indigenous people and communities all over the world. It's been a great privilege for me. I've had a good opportunity in the course of my life also to investigate the psychedelics, which bring us here tonight. Psychedelic, as you know, is mind manifesting. And this is a term that Humphrey Osmond in 1956 coined, and it has stuck. And it has stuck because it's very good. It's an expression of the mind in the greatest possible sense and vast expansion of the mind with these visionary agents. Now, psychedelics originate from nature. And while today we have many synthetic psychedelics and more coming out every week, it seems, it is the case that originally they all derive from nature. And they were discovered entirely by indigenous native people. We don't know of a natural psychedelic out there, whether it's plant or fungus, that wasn't first discovered by indigenous native people. So the fundamental and intrinsic bedrock of this whole scene is nature itself. And we know about these remarkable agents thanks to indigenous native people all over the world. There is a great push right now to pharmaceuticalize psychedelics. And this is a profiteering idea that it's really driven by a sense of opportunity, much like the early dot-com boom, people imagining vast, vast fortunes possible. And this is something that is really going full swing, as many of you know. Those of us who've delved into psychedelics very deeply over a long period of time have good reason to consider this a misguided effort. And while there certainly is a place, and only a place, for pharmaceuticalized psychedelics, for the most part, I believe it's important, and many other people do as well, that these things stay natural and wild and in the free market. And I personally predict that in many ways, the psychedelic underground will prevail. And this is apropos of what we're talking about in this conference. I also think that psilocybin mushrooms will become the primary psychedelics out there, all things considered, and will really lead the charge of this transformation. This is a quest for El Dorado, this pharmaceuticalization. I mean, I've spent plenty of time with pharmaceutical companies. I've lectured at Pfizer and Merck and GlaxoSmithKline and Roche, and I've, sat with hundreds of different pharmaceutical scientists. And these are intelligent, bright, talented people, and they all know that plant medicines are real. But the basic MO of the pharmaceutical entities is riches. That's what it's really about here. We have as our origins in the psychedelic scene, once people outside of indigenous communities became increasingly aware of them, two pioneers of great note in this conversation, one Dr. Albert Hofmann, the discoverer of LSD, and Dr. Richard Evans Schultes of Harvard, one of the great ethnobotanists in all of history, who also worked a lot with the psychedelics and really helped to bring these agents to life. Dr. Hofmann, as you know, developed LSD from ergot, which is Claviceps purpurea, a natural fungus. And Richard Evans Schultes had many experiences with ayahuasca and with the psychoactive DMT-containing snuffs of the Colombian indigenous tribes. So these are both real psychedelic pioneers. From the work that was done with plants and fungus early on, that is early on in the non-indigenous work with psychedelics, we wound up with LSD, on the left Delicid, and on the right Indocybin, which was the first psilocybin, pure psilocybin. Both of these were developed by Dr. Hofmann. He and Schultes would eventually collaborate largely and widely on plants and fungus and become two of the great experts in this field. On the non-pharma heritage side, we owe our understanding of magic mushrooms to a great extent to Maria Sabina, a curandera who lived in Mexico down in Huautla, and to the discovery of her by Gordon and his wife Valentina Wasson back in 1957, leading to the discovery of mushrooms that can cause strange visions article on the cover of Life magazine in May. And this is what really broke open the psychedelic scene. This began a tsunami of interest in psychedelics and specifically in mushrooms. And sadly, Maria Sabina would eventually die penniless and largely ostracized from her community as a result of her contribution to the popularization of the mushrooms and the huge stampede of people who went down to Mexico to try them. Other non-pharma influencers were William Burroughs, who popularized ayahuasca early in the Yahe letters in 1963. And one of the best and earliest sort of longtime accounts that we had of a shaman, the story of Manuel Cordova Rios, which came out in 1971, Wizard of the Upper Amazon. These were profound things that really influenced the whole psychedelic scene. At the very same time, New York socialite Nicole Maxwell went off into the Amazon rainforest and discovered endless plants, some of them with pharmaceutical applications. And nutrition guru Adele Davis, who wrote Let's Eat Right to Keep Fit and Let's Feed Our Kids Right, wrote about her experiences with LSD. So we owe a lot to many different people. This is just a fraction of the people that we owe sort of homage to. I want to describe to you my sense of the difference between the pharmaceuticals and the free natural market. And this applies to all of the natural plants and fungi that in any way enhance the visionary experience. Pharma is exclusive and patented. It is the job of a pharmaceutical company to get a patent so that they can have exclusivity in the market and control that part of the market. The free natural market's all inclusive, no patents. Anybody capable, anybody talented can participate. Pharma is by definition expensive. The free market is affordable. Pharmaceutical and activities, that is processes, typically use many toxic agents. You don't have to use toxins in the natural market with things like peyote and San Pedro and ayahuasca and cannabis and so many more things. The pharmaceuticals are chemical based. The free natural market agents are nature based. There's no coevolution at all with these single molecule drugs being pumped out by pharmaceutical entities. And there's millennia of coevolution between us and these entities as they grow naturally through nature. On the one hand, we're looking at isolated single molecules. And on the free market nature side, we're looking at a rich panorama of synergistic compounds. There's no traditional use of pharma. There's a rich traditional use of natural agents. Pharma is tightly controlled availability. The free market, broad and readily available. Remember, this has been going on for decades. We have a real infrastructure out there providing these psychedelics. Pharma is mechanistic, and the free natural market is sacred and wild. In 1967, the Jimi Hendrix Experience asked a simple question: are you experienced? And those of us who were got big smiles on our faces and said, yes, I am. And we understood something amazing was happening here. Because when you took psychedelics, when you had the psychedelic experience, you had an experience of vastness, of mystical consciousness, a sense of oneness with the all and the everything, something absolutely intrinsic to these beautiful transformative agents. And even though my friends and I did not have access to the research that was being generated at the time and did not know that there were many brilliant people who were working with these who could have been very good resources for us, we still managed to figure out a lot of this stuff just by engaging with the psychedelics. In September of 1967, I got high for the very first time, took 270 micrograms of white lightning LSD, and had a remarkable transformative experience. This is me 1 year later waving the American flag on a fire escape. Between 67 and 72, I would engage in 150 LSD excursions, really exploring this very often, most of the time with friends, different friends. And we learned to navigate in these things. We learned to have fun. We had some scary experiences. We went deep into meditation. Most of my friends wound up being yogis and meditators. I certainly did. I've been practicing daily since then. This is just kind of how it went. These were gateway agents for us. For those of you who may or may not have been around at the time, Orange Sunshine was a great big branded LSD, and this was something that hit the market. It was affordable, it was clean, it was beautiful, it was transformative. It made a huge difference in what happened to people's experience of so-called drugs. I never call them drugs. These are transformative agents, pure and simple. At a certain point, we started getting magic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. Many of us, most of us, didn't know that much about them in the beginning, but we would eventually learn a lot about them. Now, when you consider pharmaceutical psilocybin and psilocybin mushrooms, I just want you to look at this and see some obvious difference. Psilocybin, pharmaceutical psilocybin, contains psilocybin. That's it. Whereas psilocybin mushrooms themselves have this harmonious balance of actually hundreds of compounds. Many of the major ones are listed here, and I'm not going to go through them, working in harmony together, having evolved over millions and millions and millions of years and co-evolved with humans over millions of years. There is no comparison between the single isolated molecule psilocybin and the vastly rich, synergistic, compound-rich psilocybin mushroom experience. In 1999, Paul Stamets put together a rather remarkable event. I had the good fortune to be at it. This was the Millennium Mushroom Conference at Brighton Bush, out in basically off the grid in the Oregon woods. And many people were there. You can see Ken Kesey there, and Andy Weil, and just a tremendous number of people. And this was a great concentration of thought leaders coming together to talk mushrooms and to experience mushrooms. And it was Halloween weekend. And yes, we did have one rock'em sock'em knock'em just amazing party as a result of being there at the right time in the right place. There are these touchstone moments in history that happen all over that help to spread these things far and wide. The Grateful Dead touring, the Fish concerts, rainbow gatherings, Glastonbury, Millennium Mushroom, all of these things contribute to the proliferation of these agents. We know that with psilocybin mushrooms, great healing is possible, body, mind, and spirit. And here, obviously, a piece of an Alex Gray painting. He's done a spectacular job of showing visually something about the experience of the psychedelic consciousness itself. And now I want to talk a little bit about what I see upcoming. First of all, I want to use an expression that was told at a conference by a Hawaiian elder. He said that true healing puts into order the body, mind, and spirit with the past, the present, and the future. And I would say that true healing is the ultimate promise of psychedelics. Not that you can't just do mushrooms and spend a day on a river and enjoy yourself and play frisbee, and that's all good. That's all fine. That's all wonderful. But if you need the healing, if you need the integration, psychedelics deliver where other agents fail. From a pricing standpoint, pharmaceutical companies cannot do what they do and operate the way they operate on the free market prices. They can't survive. By definition, their stuff has to be expensive. We already have a thriving free market. I predict that the market will only thrive more, even as the pharmaceutical companies generate a lot of public relations and media on behalf of their drugs. If you build it, they will come. This is a prediction that I'm making that I don't think is that hard to figure out. As the pharmaceutical sector ramps up, as more people like Michael Pollan and others help to popularize psychedelics far and wide, certainly farther and wider than they've been popularized up to this point in time, we'll also see an explosion in free market operators, people cultivating psilocybin mushrooms, people making LSD, people making DMT, people perhaps working with mescaline masculine in different ways, labs and operations of all different kinds that may in fact be making synthetics as well as helping to cultivate natural agents will proliferate. And so it won't be as though, the pharmaceutical sector is stepping into a wide open scene. There will be territorial defense on the part of people who've been involved in this for a long time. Makers of psilocybin, pure psilocybin, are going to have a tough market position relative to psilocybin mushrooms with their vast cornucopia of harmonious synergistic compounds working together to provide a natural experience that goes back billions of years in time and connects us with all life through the genetic code. It's hard to compete against that. I think we'll see many, many more people cultivating psilocybin mushrooms on a much larger scale. And as the whole, legalized nature or rather decriminalized nature movement just keeps going, we'll see more and more cultivation that will be legal in different states. People will do more kit cultivation at home because it's easier than it ever was before. I personally think that the mushrooms will eclipse the other psychedelics because of the ease of cultivating them, because of the friendliness of the experience. I think we'll also see a lot of products made with these. We already have chocolates on the market, but I think we'll have chocolates and we'll have other forms of confections and lozenges and sprays and other forms of mushrooms that will naturally just be part of the mix. The varietalization of mushrooms will continue, just as we've seen with coffee, just as we've seen with wine, just as we've seen with teas. Do you want your Huautla mushrooms? Do you want your golden teacher mushrooms? Do you want, azurescens? What would you like? We will see a greater availability and nice packaging of various types of mushrooms as people differentiate those types. We're also going to see more cafes and mushrooms at retail. This is something that will happen. It may take time, but it will happen. And this will fit into the culture in the way that other psychoactive agents always have. As more initiatives to decriminalize nature, psychoactive plants and fungus continue, this whole scene is going to change radically. And the position that the pharmaceutical entities will occupy in a culture in which there's greater availability of all of these agents and the penalties for working with them are largely gone. This will, of course, enhance the natural free market sector tremendously and help to inhibit too much pharmaceutical growth. Just at the very same time that clinical psychedelic-assisted therapies continue to expand, many, many, many more people will take to nature to trip. Obviously, if you can trip in nature, you do. We'll see a potent ally in members of the military, especially people who've come away from conflicts with PTSD, who've been disappointed by the SSRIs and Xanax and talking therapies. Extra legal retreats. I'm not talking about sitting in a circle in the VA, but being out there in the woods with your brothers and your comrades, on mushrooms, having the experiences you're having, going through the healings you're having. We're going to see a lot of this. This is going to be a huge part of soldier-initiated recovery from traumatic experiences in warfare. We'll also see an enhanced exploration of the natural psychedelics, mushrooms, ayahuasca, iboga, and travel as hopefully COVID diminishes, and certainly not to a great extent until then. But I think this sector will also increase and grow. We'll see more spiritual churches, just as we have churches associated with ayahuasca and church associated with peyote. hopefully we'll see some churches that are based on the spirit of the plants and the fungi themselves, and not necessarily tied to a doctrine or to a particular theology that's a real estate holding. I'd like to thank you for listening to this particular part of this presentation. This is the Ayahuasca Test Pilot logo. The Ayahuasca Test Pilots have been in operation for about 12 years now. We're an ad hoc group of people who drink ayahuasca in the Peruvian Amazon. And I'd like to thank you for your time. I'm going to get back to you now, Dan. Here we are.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I am so glad that we got to finish up with an old hippie.
Yeah.
I think it's so important that, in the, there's a certain rootsiness, like, they talk about, a tree without knowledge of its history, people without knowledge of its history is like a tree without its roots. And in a lot of ways, the culture of the 60s in San Francisco and the like is a big part of the roots of this movement, whether some of the therapists and the researchers would like to admit it or not.
Well, I mean,
And
you have spectacular people who came out of that time, like Stan Groff, for example, and Joan
yes,
Halifax, who have been thought leaders in this field forever. I mean, real
mhm,
pioneers, amazing work.
indeed. And I was really happy to see you give a nod to, well, everybody but Bill Burroughs, who I feel sometimes gets left out because, because of his heroin use.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes people, there's the psychedelic exceptionalism that people talk about, that it's like, we've decided that we're okay with these, but not the, it's like we play favorites, and we, there could still be that stigma, even amongst the counterculture.
Well, I don't think it's completely unwise to stigmatize heroin addiction. I mean, I think
Right. Yes.
I mean, I'm sympathetic toward heroin addicts, but the fact of the matter is that psychedelics, by virtue of their nature, especially if they're intentionally used and in proper set and setting, affect healing, whereas heroin addiction affects a growing deterioration of body and mind. So the two couldn't be a lot different.
Well, I mean, so I like what Frederick says, caution rather than stigma.
Yeah,
And when
sure,
we start
sure.
talking about stigma, it's very easy. What we're doing when we stigmatize, we're dehumanizing the people who use heroin.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's like, then they don't get the care that they need, and then they're not treated with dignity and respect and that sort of
Right.
thing.
And that should
So
not.
that's what I mean.
Right.
I'm not saying, like, we're not going to do the heroin summit next year.
Well, that's good. And I don't know if everybody knows out there, but heroin was invented by Bayer, the pharmaceutical company, as a
Mhm.
treatment for morphine addiction. And these days you see precious few morphine addicts out there. So heroin was, in that regard, a just a banner success, but unfortunately it
Mhm.
came with severe negative effects. So what do we have for questions here? What's going on out there?
Yeah, let's get okay, Darren Bender. Pharma trying to monetize psychedelics means synthesized medicine is the only medicine being used in the funded trials. Could they be missing vital data that could only come from using the natural medicines?
Of course they could be using missing data. There's no question about it. But the problem is that you know with drug trials, they like to be able to know something about the pharmacokinetics, that is, how the stuff works in the body. Um, you can track the pharmacokinetics of a single molecule, whether it's psilocybin or acetaminophen. But when you try to track hundreds and hundreds of compounds working together in harmony, it's very, very difficult. I'm not suggesting that it's a nut that can't be cracked, but basically people who do trials don't want to have to deal with that. So the model itself is self-limiting. There's no question about it. What we have on the the positive human trial side is the kind of the epidemiological evidence that the greatest majority of people who, let's say, consume psychoactive mushrooms, who have the experience, have a positive experience. They often go back to that well for more of that positive experience. Many people describe it as transformative. Many people describe it as enlightening. And many people say it's the most profound spiritual experience I've ever had in my life. So you get this, tremendous, tremendous body of proof that these natural agents are beneficial and healing, but they don't fit into these very narrow-minded single molecule trials at all. You're right.
How do we convince approaching the general public and authorities of the potential therapeutic benefit of recreational use of these substances, as in use outside of clinical settings or therapeutic retreats?
Well, again, I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with informing various people, whether it's doctors or people who are policymakers, exactly how much of this has been going on for how long. I think to a great extent, they really don't know. They don't realize that, in fact, millions and millions of people have taken these things to great effect. But I also think that one of the things that does happen with the pharmaceuticalization is that, as sort of a spear tip of the public relations arrow, they do help to normalize the idea of psychedelics. So I think that, in that sense, I mean, we're stuck. We're bedfellows, whether we like it or not. So we might as well take full advantage of the relationship. And if the pharma entities are going to spend time, energy, and boodles of dollars promoting psychedelics and putting a friendly face on psychedelics instead of demonizing them, then that is an opportunity for us to say, yeah, but make sure they're natural and, organic and clean and haven't been made with toxic ingredients and are inexpensive and accessible to many more people, not just folks who want to go into a clinic and spend $500 to trip with eyeshades on.
Right. If only it was only $500.
Right.
Can I take a stab at that question too?
Yeah.
I feel a little bit strongly. I feel like the way to educate the public is by being a good member of the psychedelic community and just go out there as if you had your camp shirt on. I don't know if any of you, ever went to like a summer camp or like a school where they took you on a field trip and you had to wear a shirt that said, Camp Kilimanjaro or whatever. And they said, you're representing the camp, so behave.
Right.
And so if we all just went out, as if we were, that was the deal, and realized that, if we're going to tell people, oh, this makes you kinder, more connected, more empathetic, more compassionate, more creative in your thinking, more flexible, then do that. Act, let people see it. And I think that's how you win hearts and minds. Where's my Psilocybin Summit t-shirt? They're on the website. You can order one.
Well, you bring up a good point, in that you're really talking about carrying the medicine. If you show up like a complete, wild-eyed crazy, then people will say, well, this is proof that we're very cautious about psychedelics. On the other hand, if that's not the case, if you show up intelligent and clear-minded and articulate and compassionate and all that stuff, people get interested. I mean, I spent 9 years on Fox News in 100 countries as the Fox News medicine hunter, and I talked psychedelics all the time. And I showed ayahuasca and talked about magic mushrooms, and was the guy that gets credit with saying that Fox finally admits that marijuana is safe and all of that. And I can tell you that I was mostly met with an extremely positive reception. Viewer comments were almost uniformly, "Thank you so much for telling us about this. I didn't even know anything about the healing possibilities of these things." So I think there's a lot of receptivity out there and thoughtful conversation and showing up as a thoughtful person. You're right. That goes a long, long way.
Yeah, thanks. Somebody, Alberto, is concerned that the free market, how in a free market, how do we respect indigenous traditions, indigenous plants, indigenous ecology, indigenous people?
I think that really depends on the plant and on the situation. There's a lot of controversy right now about peyote. A number of people in the Native American community think that non-Native Americans shouldn't have access to peyote at all because of the scarcity of it. So there are issues that arise as a result of that. Whereas if you have something like psilocybin mushrooms, which, yes, we know about them thanks to communities in southern Mexico. These are being cultivated all over the world, and so I think that beyond, I don't want to say just beyond a tip of the hat. I don't mean to be that cursory about it, but I do think there's value to always giving credit to where these things derive. Do I think that everybody who cultivates magic mushrooms, which may not have derived from any Mexican strains at all, should, like, say, give money back to the people of Huautla or something? No, I don't think so. But I do think that there could be responsible entities out there that could start to work with communities who are ayahuasca based or peyote based or San Pedro based or mushroom based, the way we do with other botanicals. Um, you know, Working with them to help them to thrive, working with them to help them to participate in the market whenever that's possible, protecting their interests, engaging in programs and projects that further their communities, something I've been doing for decades. This is possible. And I think that there will be some visionary, sustainably run companies who will decide, look, if we're going to grow mushrooms, let's work with certain indigenous communities from which mushrooms may have derived in a way that helps them to get what they say they need. So I think there are plenty of possibilities of ways to pay respect to indigenous origins.
Great, thank you. Would you like to speak about like real wild mushrooms? So there's the difference between anonymous attendee. So there's psilocybin, chemical psilocybin. Wait, remind me, how many compounds are in chemical psilocybin? One. Oh, right. Just psilocybin. And then there are the stuff that people grow in their garage, their closet.
Right.
And then there are the psilocybin mushrooms that are out in the woods behind you.
Right.
Would you like to speak about the difference between, homegrown versus foraged?
Well, first of all, I personally do not go out and forage for psilocybin mushrooms. So I'm not speaking from experience, but I do know many people who have and do. And I think as long as you're good at your mushroom identification, which is really key because you don't want to take something that poisons your liver, then I always regard foraging or going out and looking for things in the wild as an extra opportunity to be even more connected with nature. So it seems like a plus to me, just like you might go out and get wild berries instead of, say, going to Trader Joe's and picking up a pint of blueberries. I think I don't know that from an actual mushroom experience standpoint, most people could tell the difference between closet grown and wood harvested. But I do think that the entire engagement of going into a natural environment, you know, whether it's a cow pasture and getting the mushrooms out of the patties, you know, before the bull chases you out, or whether it's going through the woods. I think that engagement with the fungus itself is an extra dimension that can be very wonderful. I mean, I cultivate cannabis, and I'm out there every day tending my plants. And just the experience of being with the plants that way from seed to finish is rich and rewarding in ways that, you know, buying a bag of ganja just could never possibly be.
Mhm. That's I mean, that's a wonderful point. And we had somebody, we were actually talking about psychedelic parenting earlier today.
Mm.
And there was, you know, a woman who is teaching her children how to grow cannabis. And they know what to look for now. And they're like, oh, mom, it needs water. Oh, mom, we need to trim here. And, you know, what a nice way to, you know, usher in a new age.
Well, sure. And, you know, kids who grow up around wineries, I mean, you know, sooner or later, they're going to want to trample grapes in a barrel. That's going to
Yeah.
happen. You know, it's like, and why not? I mean, you know, when I travel, whether it's in kava communities in the South Pacific, or, you know, communities in the Amazon where they harvest cat's claw, or places in Siberia where they collect berries, you know, at certain times the kids are with their parents helping, you know, they're participating, they're learning, they're obviously enjoying it. This is, I'm not talking about indentured servitude here. You know, helping children to appreciate these things and also to understand the place in their lives when they're allowed to utilize them. That's all good education. That's all smart, sensible stuff.
Yeah. Can you envision, so back to this free market idea, can you envision, Alberto's talking about things like cooperative and sharing paradigms, you know, co-ops and compassionate care organizations, things that maybe, I guess, hold to something higher than just, you know, the almighty dollar.
Well, certainly, certainly. I mean, you know, if you don't have to worry about shareholders, you know, making sure you get, quote, shareholder value, then you can concentrate on, you know, what's really known as stakeholder value. I mean, people for whom these things can make a phenomenal difference. Yeah, look, I think that cooperatives and making sure that people who want access to these things can get them regardless of their, you know, financial position, all of that should be part of the mix. You know, these things should not be exclusive. I will say that I do not believe that they should be freely given to the abjectly crazy. And, you know, we can argue about fine points of mental illness, but you know somebody who's truly nuts when you run into them. And I do think that there is a limit to the access. But that would be true with anything else. I mean, that would be true in some cases with an automobile or a firearm or whatever. So I don't think that's unique to psychedelics. We do have to be realistic about the fact that there are healthy and terribly unhealthy people in the world.
Yes, that's I think it was one of Leary's things. Leary was talking about, just like you have a skydiving license, you know, he envisioned, you know, the places where people could go, and you would have to get your license to take LSD, and then you could go to one of these places and there would be singing bowls and you could take LSD. And to be honest, that's one of the things that inspired, we have like a 4-week course called Sitting for Psychonauts, and that's basically what it is that, like, almost like, how do you be, what skills do you need to be your own best trip sitter?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. Well, and yes, and I think these things are valuable and good and really positive. And I can also tell you that when my friends and I started dropping acid and eventually eating mushrooms and doing all the various things we did, which was kind of largely by the Braille method, it wasn't that hard to figure out the basics. I mean, I became a trip sitter pretty much as soon as I started tripping. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, I get what needs to happen here. This person needs to know that they're not alone on an asteroid and they need to be reeled back in with kindness. Got it.
Mhm.
And, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify, but that's one of the amazing things about these agents. We talk about them as teachers often, okay? They teach us how to use them. And not everybody gets the teachings, let's say, at an A+ level, but lots of people do. And that owes to the remarkable nature of the psychedelics themselves. They are not only these experiential agents that can transform our lives and heal us, but they can also genuinely, for real, teach us actual practical knowledge that we can plug into the psychedelic situation itself and also to the rest of life.
Very well said. Yeah, it is, I think, also important to note that, all things being equal, especially with friends and family, that it's not rocket science.
Right,
And I think that the, I find myself keep banging the drum of friends and family.
right, right.
It's instead of, again, Leary said, it's like, be wary of experts,
Mm-hmm.
and, when there's already that rapport built and you look at somebody and that they love you, they know they have their best interest at heart, even if you're being a little paranoid,
Mm-hmm.
rapport goes a long way.
Oh yes, oh yes, and right now you can become certified to facilitate psychedelic experiences and never once ever have taken a psychedelic yourself,
Right.
and that's just shameful. That's like being a swimming coach and never having gone into water. That's nuts. Because it is the psychedelic experience that we're talking about here.
Right.
This isn't a matter of like the proper way to paint your windows. So I think we have some real work to do in terms of kind of sorting out what experience really matters. Certainly being informed about the basics, understanding the principles, that's nothing but valuable. And imparting that to people is very good and wonderful and wise. But if you don't take the dive off the board into the deep end, if you don't do that a bunch of times, if you don't swim way down to the bottom and go far, far out there, you can't possibly know what you're dealing with in a ceremony, in a session. You just can't know it.
You can't know it, and you can't offer the energy to somebody that they need.
No,
It's
no.
like if you have, there's a certain kind of there's a certain kind of look in the eye that only comes from like having gone through hell for like 16 lifetimes one night.
Right,
And
right.
when you're watching somebody go through it and you're just sort of like, I love you, you're gonna be okay. That it's like that, there's a resonant vibration that is palpable.
Early in boarding school, so we're talking I was 16, I had to get one of our star athletes out of a toilet stall and back to his dorm without being caught the night of the big school dance. And
Mm-hmm.
the only reason I was able to help him was I knew the psychedelic experience. I'd been tripping, a number of times at that point. And so reaching this guy who was terribly lost and really confused and basically massively fucked up at the time, um, you know, it gave me a line in. I understood what I was dealing with. Had I not understood that, I don't think I could have been helpful at all in that situation. And
Yeah.
this is something that I personally believe we should insist on, if people are going to, quote, facilitate experiences, if people are going to, really help people, they have to know the experience they're facilitating.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's a silly exercise.
And I would even suggest a wide variety of experience,
Mhm.
because there is a difference between giving somebody, we got corrected. It's not psilocybin in the pills, it's psilocin. Um, in a therapy office versus getting somebody out of a bathroom, getting somebody off of a roof, getting somebody to the porta potties through a concert, like all of these sorts of, convincing your friend that he really should get out of the street, just get back in the car. We'll get you some tea. These sorts of like various kind of strange experiences where you sort of have to use your faculties and you have to like be able to enter the internal logic of the situation and play there,
Mhm.
play there.
Mhm. Sure,
So
sure.
like they said, smooth seas never made skilled sailors.
That's the truth. If you haven't surfed a 500-foot wave in your psychedelic experience, terrified and needing to get to safer, calmer waters, you don't know that experience. And if
Mhm.
somebody's having it, you're bewildered. So
Well,
what
and
else do we
also
have going on here I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and then I will see if there's a question. I don't know if I want to say resilient, but like there's a certain anti-fragileness that also comes from just surviving, making it through, just the knowledge that, oh yeah, yeah, we'll make it.
Well, yes, and there's for many people, and this of course dates back in antiquity to a number of different mythic journeys, but there's often the so-called dweller on the threshold,
Mhm.
before you gain entry into the blissful you know other dimensions, you have to go through some sort of trial. You have to get past this dweller or these dwellers, and that is something to become familiar with. As you know, many people very early on go, "Oh no, I don't know if I'm ever going to come back," and you know, it's good to have had that experience, and then of course
Mhm.
have come back and gone, "Yeah, okay, well, I am in fact back, yes," and if you haven't had that, then when somebody has that, you can't appreciate their momentary terror or their bewilderment or their sense of being completely overwhelmed and knocked out of the park by this thing.
Yeah, yeah. So there you go. Get out there and get knocked out of the park.
Well, look,
So,
tripping, I appreciate now that we are in a time in which many people are microdosing. I mean, I started microdosing mushrooms in 1983. I made an extract of that, and I do a few drops a day, and I found it brightening and very nice. But fundamentally, my friends and I came out of the trip solidly school, and I think we really have two paths now. We've got the cognitive enhancement group that's utilizing small doses of psilocybin mushrooms and small doses of LSD to enhance cognitive function in a variety of ways to make the senses more vivid. But let's not forget to just really full on trip, because it is the full on trip that brings the unified experience, that brings that sense of awe and wonder. And I would really hate to see that get lost in the shuffle of the pharmaceuticalization of this whole category.
awesome. So we did have a question. We are mostly out of time. I just, I have a brief closing circle after this. Do you want to highlight some of your current projects with Indigenous people as we close?
Well, actually, I'd love to, but because of COVID-19, I don't have really many going on. I mean, I'm
Got it.
doing some work across the ocean with my friends in Vanuatu, South Pacific, in kava culture. But COVID has been devastating for my career. I mean, I've spent 40 to 50% of my time traveling for the last 40 years or so. And since
Mhm.
the advent of this pandemic, I haven't been able to do that. So at this point in time, mostly what I'm doing is writing articles and doing other things to educate about some of the people and
Mhm.
places I've been. But right now, my active projects are largely inactive.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah, it is.
But I look forward to seeing some of the things that you're writing.
Well, thanks.
And anytime you get bored, I'm always happy to spin up a Zoom call for the people with you as well.
That would be very wonderful, Dan. And I so much appreciate being part of the Psilocybin Summit. Again, I think it's a tremendous, tremendous piece of work, and it's given so much voice to so many fine people with different understandings of this really
Mhm.
vast and fascinating category.
Uh, yeah, it's my pleasure. And I appreciate you saying that. That's kind of you. And yeah, and again, thank you all. Thank you, Chris. Lots of thank you, lots of appreciation for you and your sharing.
My wife Zoe
Yeah.
says hello. You know, you had her on earlier.
Hmm. Oh, and she is like, I love her work, and I'm so happy to have been introduced to some of, the emerging voices people,
Sure.
and to have them pop in. And I've had at least one of them on the summit last year. I'll probably have a bunch of them on next year.
Terrific,
Um,
terrific. Well, no,
yeah,
she pours her heart into this psychedelic feminism work. It really has been impressive to see what she's done over the years.
cool. Yeah, any sort of like famous last words to
Yes,
close on?
yes. Remember, it's all about love. Love is kind of like the most amazing place you can possibly wind up in with psychedelics. And it gives you a sense of the intrinsic worth and value of love. There is nothing else that comes close. And if we can take a carry away message from psychedelics, it's to love ourselves and others much more than we have and much more than we do, to the betterment of everybody.
Very much so. All right. Much love,
Much
much
love.
respect.
Thank you.
I'll see you guys all in a brief closing circle in about 15.
Blessings.
Blessings.